It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are talking about The Midnight Lie by Marie Rutkoski. All right, so we are in fantasy wherever. This is just a fantasy setting. It's a society in which there is a caste system. There are three castes: the half-kith, the middlings, and the high-kith. The high-kith are the super rich, the middlings are the petite bourgeoisie, and the half-kith are the proletariat. In this society, an orphan is adopted by a woman named Raven, who sets her to work. This orphan has an eidetic memory, which makes her very good at forging passports, which is what Raven uses her for. And then one day a Elysium bird flies into the half-kith quarter, which is walled off from the rest of the city. And this orphan girl uses this to as a opportunity to begin to pursue her dreams. And at the same time, a butch lesbian from overseas arrives in the half-kith quarter, and our orphan takes this as an opportunity to pursue that dream as well. And in the process of doing that, finds out what happened, why we're in this fantasy setting, and so forth.
Yeah. That's a very elliptical summary, because you're trying real hard to avoid spoilers.
Yeah. I mean, you know.
But I think that's...
It is pre-spoiler zone, after all.
Exactly. You know, I think that's a pretty good summary.
Thank you. This book has lesbians in it.
Except you might want to mention that the character has a name, which is Nira.
Oh, yeah. Nareem, according to the narrator. But the narrator of the audiobook makes a number of choices, which I'm not sure I agree with.
Honestly, though, Nareem sounds reasonable to me.
Yes. Right. But yes, Nareem is clearly a lesbian. And Sid is very much lesbian. Our first butch lesbian since Gideon herself, I think.
Really?
I think so.
Wasn't Rainbow kind of butch?
Oh yeah, Rainbow, of course. My bad. Yeah, no, Rainbow totally counts. Yes, but so we got Rainbow, we got Gideon, and we have Sid so far.
And we have Terrain.
Yeah, actually.
In the Unbroken. And Terrain is definitely a butch.
Yes, and in fact, it is this of the books that we've read. This one reminds me the most of the Unbroken. It has a lot in common with the Unbroken.
And Leora has just texted me to point out that Sorway is also butch.
Right. So we've had plenty of butches. But is it fair to say that with the possible exception of Rainbow, Sid is the most classic butch that we've come across?
Seen since Gideon? I mean, Gideon is about as... Gideon and Rainbow are both pretty classic butches. But yes, Sid is definitely, in many ways, a classic butch. I don't get the impression that she's super, ripped.
That's true. It might be more accurate to call her sort of trans mask, in fact. But that is not a subject that the book wants to...
She's definitely got that, is she butch or is she trans mask, thing going on.
Sure. But anyway, yeah, no, definitely lesbians. Wizards, absolutely. In conflict, 100%. This is a very down the middle Wizards versus lesbian story. There's no question that it belongs in the microgenre.
Yes.
So, with that being said, why should you read this book?
The last third is actually pretty good.
Yeah, that's... This book is kind of okay, so the Unbroken, right?
Much like there's three castes, I feel like you can neatly also divide this book to some degree into three tiers, into thirds. The first third is a real slog. The second third is at least starting to get interesting, even if Nareem still doesn't have a lot of agency. And then I do feel like the last third is actually some interesting moments.
Indeed. If I were to say, so if you liked The Unbroken, but you thought that it was too long and that the relationships in it were not particularly well drawn, this does a better job with the relationship aspect between the cross-class relationship thing. and a much worse job with the politics, even than The Unbroken.
Yes. And the world building is not.
And the world building is not nearly as good, but it's short. So if you like The Unbroken and want more, read this book, even if it ultimately is a bit incoherent.
I would say that is, that's true. I would also, just to be fair to this book, it has some nice, cool visual descriptions and scenery. If you have Nareem is such a visual oriented person, and that the author, I think, does actually a good job of having that come through in the narrative. And so if you also have a fairly visual imagination, there's some pretty good scenes to just picture, which I enjoyed.
I found the relationship, the sort of the first love kind of intensity of the relationship compelling.
Yeah. And I thought that it was handled, because I feel like often in these books, we've often found that the relationship has been kind of weirdly the weak point, despite the fact that the queerness of these books is one of their selling points.
It's definitely the strongest thing this book has going for it, IMO.
It really is, yeah. It's also, if you like twist endings, it's got a twist ending.
It has a twist ending. I don't count that as either a positive or a negative.
That's fair. But these are why you should read this book, and so are you?
If you like twist endings, yes. As far as why you shouldn't read this book, if you thought that The Fever by Wallace Shawn was just a little too subtle, and you really, really, really want to just nail what Marx and Engels were talking about, as far as
this really does have a Upton Sinclair writes why it's like lesbian
oil 5 exclamation marks the YA lesbian novel.
This is yes, right. To be fair, the relationships were not Upton Sinclair's strong point.
That's true. If you wanted more lesbians in your Upton Sinclair, this book will do that for you. Yeah, no, I would say that this book is not good, is the major reason not to read it. It kind of falls apart, but
it kind of falls apart. I mean, I would not have reread it if I were not doing this for the podcast, but honestly, on the reread, I skimmed the first third, and found the second 2/3 were an enjoyable hour and a half, because it's not very long.
Yeah, exactly.
So this book is not good, but if you just need to soak up a few hours.
Sure. And don't I would advise against the audiobook. Not because the author is not good, or not because the narrator is not good, but because you can't skim through it sections with an audiobook, and also because the audiobook performer makes some decisions that add to the unsubtlety of the proceedings.
I see.
Which we will discuss once we get to the spoilers. Right. Does that, let's see, content warnings. Again, the threat of rape.
Yeah. Actually, not just the threat of rape. She does get coerced into having sex with somebody when she doesn't want to.
That is true. That is true.
It's not it's not a violent scene. It's her boy. She sleeps with her nominal boyfriend, who she is not into, because she's worried that otherwise he will report her to the authorities.
Yes.
So
whether rightly or wrongly worried about that. Yeah, but the threat of government rape also, that is mentioned. Threat of mutilation.
And
blood
in fact,
drinking.
getting blood drinking, and also blood drawn.
Yeah. What else? Anything else? I'm afraid coerced adoption is the content that we missed. We will make notes in the future to be better about this. Gaslighting? There's a lot of gaslighting, actually.
There's a lot of gaslighting. I mean, and actually, that's a good reason, I think, why you should read this book. Is it actually is a fairly good depiction of an abusive mother figure.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say that is the other thing that it has going for it, is that Raven is a very good, very well drawn abusive mother.
Right. Like she's, in that way of, I suppose if you're not familiar with these dynamics, you might think it's unsubtle, but actually I found their entire relationship to be really realistic and compelling.
Yeah. Again, like it's really the characters and the relationships is where this book shines.
Right. And the world building and plotting is where this book just falls flat in its face.
Yes. Indeed.
And pacing.
And politics. So
and politics.
Let's head over to the spoiler zone then, unless I've missed anything.
Yes. Nope, I think we're ready.
Awesome. Spoiler zone. All right, here in the spoiler zone. So the half-kith get normal American accents, as does Sid. The middlings get Australian accents, and the high kith get upper-class snobby British accents, except for the dressmaker who helps Noreen out, who gets a South African accent. I think that's what she was going for. Yeah. It's a series of choices.
That's a series of choices.
Although I have to say that if you want to really hammer on how horrible Raven is, hearing her say these things to Noreen in an Australian accent really just punches it up a few more notches.
Wow.
It's something.
This is a real, the audiobook is a different experience.
Yep.
That's great.
So I don't know. Yeah, maybe do read the audiobook if you want to add another dimension to your experience there.
Yeah.
Okay, so what to discuss first? I think that the most interesting thing to me about this book is the way in which it sets up love and desire. Because love pretty much across the board here is used as a mechanism of coercion and control. Raven loves...
And betrayal and pain.
Right. Raven loves Noreen, which is why she, Raven tells Noreen that she loves her, but Noreen also believes that Raven loves her and therefore gets away with letting Raven exploit her from pillar to post. And Raven's boyfriend... Jesus Christ, I'm having extra problems with the names today.
Right. Noreen's terrible boyfriend.
Noreen's terrible boyfriend. He's terrible.
He threatens her with exposure to like coerce her into continuing to date him when she's obviously not into him. He's terrible.
He does that after she has agreed to marry him and then says, no, actually I'm not going to marry you.
Right, but the thing is that
he does that when he's upset and pouty. But yeah, no, he's not a great human being. No, but
I'm sorry. When you threaten somebody with turning them over to the authorities in an authoritarian police state where being turned over to the authorities results in mutilation or death, just because you're pouty because you saw her flirt with somebody else, that makes you terrible.
All I'm saying is that he did that after Noreen basically led him on and then dumped him. This isn't a real good look for Isaac. He should not be defending this man. Go ahead and lead him on. It's certainly you're right. It doesn't mean that he should take your life.
But I don't really actually think she led him on. Part of it's, you definitely come in through her point of view, but as far as I can tell, mostly her relationship with him is him pressuring her for stuff and her saying yes, and him taking that as establishing a relationship, which thus gives him the right to pressure her for more things.
Yeah, I under...
this is very much the, he's like the classic nice guy.
Yeah, no, he is. And that is sort of the point of it. But I did feel kind of bad for him until I didn't. But, I was like...
I would have felt a lot worse for him if he hadn't been, just such a dick
he's also just such a dick throughout, and he's a homophobe also, lest we forget.
But to be fair, most of the
they come from a homophobe. This society here is homophobic, but, he's looking out for it.
Right.
But yeah, regardless, no, he uses his professed love for her as a mechanism of control and coercion also.
Right. And I think honestly part of why I had such a strongly negative reaction to him is that he really read to me like somebody who saw, who saw this person who's in this like exploited, who's being exploited and abused and having having her love taken advantage of, and went, that's the person for me. And not like, and then does a lot of the same things, only softer, and like tells himself that, and tells her that this makes him a better person. But to me, that came off as very predatory.
Oh yeah. And the fact that he said that he, knew, he was aware of what Raven was doing to her and didn't tell her because he, quote, didn't want to hurt her, which is obviously, I mean, we were talking about gaslighting earlier. Like, none of the people here in this book love Noreen except Sid.
And no, to be fair, her foster sisters.
Yeah, her foster sisters do, but they
like one of her foster sisters takes the actual risk of saying, "No, you're being abused. I know you probably won't believe me, but I'm going to tell you what she did to me."
Yeah, and like, so, but the most of the
we should put that in the content warnings.
The child
coerced adoption.
Yes, yeah, the child thievery. No, you're right. I guess that's pretty intense. The point that I'm trying to make is that most of what Noreen experiences as love in her life is false, and then she follows her desire to something resembling truth. And I think and the book actively sets up this dichotomy where, like, desire is real. It's not so much the queer desire as the revolutionary moment, but the desire itself is the revolutionary. There kind of is this. Well, yeah, but it's also, I mean, they talk a lot about how the reason the half-kith are kept down is that they are not allowed to want, which is what the sumptuary laws are about.
Yes. But I mean, the thing is that I think that the queerness is actually pretty integral to this story. Because, I mean, first of all, compulsory heterosexuality is in fact like part of the oppression of the half-kith.
Yeah.
They're forced, because, to produce more half-kith, they're forced to be, in heterosexual marriages and strongly encouraged to have lots and lots of babies.
Just to be clear, I'm not saying this book isn't a queer desire as the revolutionary moment book, because it absolutely is.
But it really leans. But you're right that often in these books the queer is what gets leaned on, and in this case it really is the desire.
Yeah. And
in fact, once Niram starts actively wanting things is when the book starts getting interesting.
Yeah. No, I mean, it does sort of. I mean, again, to say things that are positive about the book, like her. One of the reasons that the first third of the book is tedious is that it takes place within this very circumscribed world that she finds herself in, and it's only when she's able to sort of see beyond that world that the possibilities of both her life and the narrative open up. So, and, I guess that works.
As a like narrative device, it works. The problem is that it's makes that first chunk of the book real boring, because you have a character who doesn't really want anything. I mean, she wants love and approval, and that's sort of dangled like a carrot in front of her, but she doesn't, she's not active. Things sort of happen to her.
Right.
And even when she's trying to take steps, she's not like willing to commit to them.
Yeah. I mean, do we want to like just abandon, having a separate section for what annoyed us about the book? Because I think I have more things that annoyed me about the book than didn't.
I feel like we can try to leave them, because I do think that there's other things to talk about in the book.
True.
But maybe not.
Well, I mean, let's do our best to turn her.
So I do think, because building on the whole desires, the revolutionary moment, one of the things that I think is interesting is that Nareem goes into this understanding that this is going to be a temporary thing. Like, she's not which is basically the one relationship in her life where she's not convinced that this person loves her and thus she has to sacrifice.
Right.
She's just like, no, this person is into me but is leaving.
Yeah, she's...
And I am into this person. And so I'm going to sleep with her even though this isn't going to go anywhere.
Yeah, and so there's a certain amount of freedom in that. But of course, that does.
But it's still a source of pain.
Yeah, and it does lead her to missing the fact that Sid is actually arguably in love with her.
Right. But it's just still, even this like revolutionary sort of liberation romance still is a source of pain. Like, there is absolutely no love in this book which does not result in pain.
Yes, it does. That is true. And also, like, we want to say that there are a lot of books where queer desire is the revolutionary moment, and that's an uncomplicated good thing. Whereas this book is very aware that revolution is tricky, and more often than not results in the recapitulation of former crimes, except committed against a different class of people by the class of people that were previously being crimed on, or even the same people getting suffering, which is, it is not not particularly subtle the way the book puts that idea forward, but at least it seems to be aware that revolution isn't just this cool shiny thing in a way that a lot of the books that we're talking about aren't. So that's awesome.
Right.
That's good.
Yeah, and I mean, and also that like freedom, that like sort of freedom and liberation doesn't necessarily lead to happy endings.
Yeah.
I actually do respect this book, and I mean, yes, there's a sequel coming out, but I do actually sort of of course.
Okay.
Because the ending is a bit of a cliffhanger, right?
No, it's not.
But it doesn't have to be, and I do respect this book for like having the conviction to have a like to like really resolve.
Yeah, no, I mean
itself in a non-happy way.
Yeah, I'm not going to read the sequel, but I think that
of course not.
It's possible that the sequel could be interesting in the way that it tries to do something with this situation and see what happens next after what seems to be a relatively final moment there.
I mean, my guess is that, because of course I am going to read the sequel, my guess is that we will get like queer desire as the healing force, and perhaps she will get her heart back somehow.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, this book did impress me with its willingness to have the ending be,
yeah,
kind of terrible.
Once again, it's the YA charm. You can get away with that kind of thing.
Right, exactly. And also, though, the other thing I did enjoy about the ending, which for our listeners who've not read the book, is Nuriem finds out the whole secret history of like the city where gods got murdered and all that. But the important thing is that she like bargains away her heart in exchange for reawakening everybody's suppressed memories in the city.
Yeah.
And then declares herself like a god and queen of the city.
Yes, as one does.
As one does.
When one makes compromises for political power.
Yes. And like,
I'm just remembering how very quickly this book starts to proceed at that point. It's like we've been waffling along for so long, and then here's the end of the allegory within like 20 pages,
Right, and then it's just like, bam, trades her heart away, and and then like within fewer than 20 pages,
right?
Just hey, the city is freed, everybody has unlocked their magic. Nuriem shows up and is like, hey y'all, I am a god and your queen. Bow down.
Yep. Made me. But anyway, we'll come back to the pacing.
Which. But the thing is that one of the things I really did enjoy about this ending is that, the entire book, Nuriem has waffled and, first she didn't want anything, and then, she learned to want things, and then she learned to, like, go after the things that she wanted, even though she knew they would bring her pain, until by the end, she's just willing to, actually take control and make decisions, and the fact that these decisions are going to have like horrible world-shaking ramifications does not even matter to her. And it's an enjoyable like tone shift, I think.
Yeah. Sort of, I mean, like, hey, we've taken up desire as our weapon here. Although
right, and then she renounces desire, and that's like, her, and that's unlocks her ultimate power.
Yeah.
Because it turns out once she stops caring what other people think about her, she can rule the entire city if she wanted.
It's very interesting that, I mean, which sort of leaves desire as a kind of untrammeled good here, and
No, because I mean, it causes her a ton of, because her desire causes her a ton of pain. It causes her so much pain that she is willing to give away her heart.
Oh yeah, but it's like, I mean, in terms of doing the right thing, leaning into the desire and not giving away your heart is sort of presented as the morally correct decision. I would say, I mean, unless you're into tyrants, I guess.
Right, but the thing is that on the other hand, if she had not done that, then the city would not be liberated.
True. I had this thought the other day. If you want to start a wrestling company, you need at least one egomaniac psychopath on your staff. Because who else would agree to do something so manifestly impossible? You need that maniac self-belief to get it off the ground, or to start your revolution. The question is, what do you do with Cody Rhodes after the fact? Or in this case, your God Queen? I'm sort of interested in the connection between desire and memory here. Because memory is the other sort of huge theme point. Noreen's superpower, and like the idea in brief is that the half-kith are locked away because they have god blood in them, most of them, and therefore some of them have special powers. Like,
well, they're mostly locked away because they weren't they in some way involved in like murdering a god, or was somebody else involved in murdering a god?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole thing.
A god got murdered.
Yeah. They did. Their ancestors were involved in murdering a god. But in the primary moment, they're locked away so that the rich people can drink their blood and sort of get high.
Which I have to say is a fascinating and mildly distressing. Like, I'm not sure how I feel about that, because there's some weird reverse blood libel stuff going on about murdering God, but then drinking their blood.
Again, yes, there's a lot to go over in the what made us angry about this book section.
Yes.
It's the blood libel. It's the blood libel. It's the blood libel. That's what we're talking about. But yeah, no, the point that I'm trying to make is that it's the fact that the half-kith don't remember who they are that is what keeps them down, and is what keeps the sort of the status quo in place. And this book is very much about how, I mean, what is a correct observation that if you don't know that change is possible, then change isn't possible. If you don't have any conception of what a better life could be, then you're never going to work for a better life. And so by taking away people's history and consigning them to, and, you know, convincing them that that they're a lower class and that's just the way the world is and that's how God made the world, then you keep them under control until they realize other ways.
Yes.
So therefore, cultivating memory is a revolutionary act per this book, which I think is a pretty decent. But the point that I was making beforehand is that Nareem's power is that she can remember her whole life, and that she can cause other people to remember things, or it turns out to remember false things.
Right. And that is another thing I did enjoy about the book, is once, you know, when she discovers her memory power, she does not for once, she does not waffle about that. She's just like, great, I can like do creepy mind control stuff and control people's memories. And then she does. And this is not necessarily a morally good thing that she's doing.
It does
but
accelerate the pace of that last section tremendously, which is very helpful.
It does. It's, you know, I think that it is interesting to watch, and I feel like the author does a fairly good job of selling Nareem's character evolution from somebody who is desperate to please, and, you know, to somebody who is absolutely ruthless. Like, it feels like a natural progression.
Yeah, no, I would, yeah, I would say so.
Because you know, her willingness to do things, you know, first she starts taking more risks, and then she starts like pushing back against the people who she's been sort of, you know, desperate to please, and going along with whatever they say, and then, you know, and then she starts discovering her powers, and she starts going after Sid, and then she starts discovering her powers. And so by the time she's actually discovered her powers, she's already been sort of betrayed, you know, felt betrayed and awakened enough that it makes sense that she's willing to just go, yes.
I mean, I didn't question it at all because I had never thought that she was a particularly good person or a particularly interesting person. She was completely undeveloped as a human being, and sort of like stepping onto the ladder toward basic selfishness counted as personal growth for her.
Right, exactly.
Which is like, product of trauma and product of being brought up by somebody who doesn't tell you anything real, and being forced to doubt your own perceptions about the world and all of that stuff. It does leave you the basic problem that I don't like any of the characters in this book, but
yeah, that's fair. Like, none of the people in this book are like good people, except I like her sister, who's going, look, I'm here because I need the money and because I'm worried about you too, but I hate this woman and I am just resentfully working for this woman that I hate.
Yes. A minor character who is then sort of dismissed at the end by the newly tyrannical Narian.
But no, I mean, nobody in this, like, Sid is shallow and self-absorbed and is throwing away all of her responsibilities to go chase around the world.
I mean, this sort of brings up a question, like, does a book need to have a character who the audience likes to be good?
Well, okay, but define likes, because I mean, I don't like any of these people in the sense that, like, I believe that they are good people or I would want to be friends with them, but I found Niram interesting. First as just sort of a, I did not find her interesting for the first, like, third to half of the book.
Right.
But the second half of the book, like, I found her interesting. I was curious to see, like, what she would do. I think that she is, and her character development is interesting. And I think what you need is something compelling.
Yeah.
And I think also some people need to like the protagonists. And I've noticed that in some of the books, when you tend to dislike characters, usually because you think that they're shallow and have bad politics, you tend to dislike the rest of the book. And I tend to go, but I don't think that we're supposed to think that this is a good person. And tend to be more interested in that.
Yeah, no, I think that this is a trap that I tend to fall into, I would say. But I guess that, I mean, sometimes, like, it depends on how interesting the rest of the book is, because, like, even if the rest of the book isn't doing anything particularly spectacular, if I have a rooting interest, that at least can keep me engaged. I mean, I think that it might be fair to say that if you're going to have a story where none of the characters are quote unquote likable, or quote unquote good people, that just increases the challenge of crafting a compelling narrative or putting interesting ideas in the book. And I think we've gone over, like, there are some things that this book brings up which are interesting, some quite interesting ideas, and some that are less so. Which is why I didn't hate this book, but it certainly would have helped if I had liked any of the people who we were, POVing about.
Yeah, I honestly think that part of the difference in how we read books often is that I can root for a character who I don't particularly like because I just want to see, what I'm invested in isn't the personal success of this little imaginary person. I'm invested in, the development and progression of the story.
Yeah. And
the character is, like, the center of that.
Yeah, no, I understand that, like, art criticism is a different thing than, like, did I find this personally enjoyable? And,
But it's not even a matter of art criticism. I think it's also just, like, I'm capable of empathizing with viewpoint characters even when they're awful.
I don't think that I'm not capable of empathizing with viewpoint characters even if they're awful. I just want them to, fail if they're awful, But I mean, I'm sort of reminded of our discussion of Light from Uncommon Stars, where, like, you were affronted that the bad moms weren't punished or weren't.
But the thing is, I wasn't affronted that the bad moms weren't punished. I was affronted that the narrative, that, like, the narrative did not seem invested in the bad mom and like what the bad mom's doing being bad enough to be taken as seriously as some of the other bad people in the book.
Right.
It felt, because that's the thing is that if I read something and everybody's awful, but whatever, I can still enjoy the story. But if I read something where there's some things that the narrative wants me to agree, yes, these are bad, and some things where the narrative wants me to agree, these are minor. And especially when these are minor involves abusive mothers, that's frustrating. And it's not frustrating because I expect every story to be didactic, or I expect the good guys to always win. But because I don't like it when narratives just sort of shallowly reflect this idea that I think has done a lot of harm to a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. Like, it's the things that it's when the narrative regurgitates ideas without reckoning with them.
Right. Exactly. And particularly when it sort of reinforces them.
Yeah.
Which, Life from Uncommon Stars doesn't do it that much, which is why I didn't hate it the way I hated a recent book I read, where part of the moral of the story was, oh, well, your abusive mom just loves you, and you shouldn't be so hard on her.
Yeah.
But and so it's the difference between I'm capable of enjoying a story where, and even empathizing with a character who is a homophobe, but not if the narrative expects me to be empathizing with their homophobia. And I have no problem reading a story where homophobia exists, but not where the homophobia is baked into the, narrative voice and narrative agenda.
Yeah, no, I understand the distinction. There is such a thing as in any of these books, there are characters who have moral outlooks, but then the narrative inevitably also has a moral outlook.
Right. And particularly when the narrative's moral outlook is clearly isn't even the author trying to make to make a point, but when it's clear that the author just assumes that I will agree with it.
Yes. Cool. I thank you for that. I'm glad that that seems like a good sort of, because I've been thinking about this as we've gone through these books, and I've sort of looked back on my reactions to various ones where I was like, I sometimes resort to pearl clutching just to bag on a book that I didn't like, if you know what I mean. It's not necessarily this character was bad, and so and therefore I didn't like the book. It's like I didn't like the book, and therefore one of my routes of criticism is going to be this character is bad. I think I did that with Byron Cormorant the first time around. I was like, but in that case it was, I think this character is bad in a way that the author doesn't understand, or more than that, it was like, I think the author thinks the world is worse than it is in a way which I find morally questionable. It's not so much the character herself,
or for Barely a Lady. One of your real negative reactions that you seem to have to Barely a Lady was just affront to having to read about shallow rich people.
I stand by that. I find that unfun. If there's nothing fun about the thing, then I'm not going to say that I liked it.
You don't have to enjoy it, but it's a good example of how you dislike these people because they're shallow and rich, and thus that became your avenue of criticism for the rest of the book.
Right, exactly. I mean, not that I had to reach far to find an avenue of criticism. Kins, gather round. I have an important story to tell about the difference between an immoral character, an immoral narrative, and an immoral storyteller. If a character does bad things, that's okay. If a story doesn't punish him, that's also okay. It's whether the story knows that he did something wrong that's the issue. Be that as it may. Since we've started talking about criticism, shall we go on to the critical part of the podcast?
You just really want to complain about this book.
No, I mean, I'm perfect. Like, if you have other... I think I've just run out of things to talk about otherwise. Do you have any other things about the book that you wanted to discuss that are interesting? This stretch of unedited silence would usher in the grumpy zone, but first I have to explain to Alex the concept of gap moe.
No, I mean, I think I do think that we can now go to criticizing, because the whole incoherent blood libel thing really did annoy me.
Yes. Before we go there, I'll just say that Sid has gap moe, which I appreciated.
Has what?
Gap moe. Are you familiar with this term?
No.
Oh, it's if a character, when a character is like, tough and cool on the surface, but has like cute vulnerabilities that peek out, that is called gap moe now, because of the gap between the surface and the moe beneath.
Yes, no, she's a very classic gap moe.
I'm glad to have been able to impart this information to you on the podcast.
I do actually enjoy that, like, for all that Sid is trying to present herself as a badass, it's very clear that, like, her only special, like, thing is that she's moderately charming and she has a lot of money.
Yep. I really actually enjoyed Sid as a character. She's certainly my favorite part of the book.
Right, like, and I feel like it does a good job of, you can really see why Nareem would be into this person, right? Because, she's charming.
Nareem is gullible.
Nareem is gullible. But also, like, this is somebody this is also the first person who's been, like, actively eager to please Nareem.
True.
As opposed to the other way around. And for whom Nareem gets to be, because, they meet in prison, Nareem gets to sort of be like, no, I think you're lying. No, I'm not going to do that for you. And I think that that's part of the charm, is that here's somebody who takes her nose and as flirting, as opposed to as like something that
should be crushed immediately. Yeah, exactly.
Right, exactly. And so that's but I think that it's a good depiction of somebody who you can look at this and you go, I can totally see how this girl is Nareem's first love. And also, it's a good job of, this is the intensity of first love, and that does not actually mean that the target is worth all these intense emotions.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. There we go. Again, I know I've said this over and over again, but the relationships in this book are well observed. The
relationships and characterization are. Yeah. Right. So now we can complain.
Yes, let's complain. Okay, we're at the grumpy zone. Let's talk about what made us mad. Okay, so this is another instance where, possibly because of, perhaps a bit of moral cowardice, much like the Unbroken, atheism is standing in for monotheism, because the whole, class tension of the book is between this vanished polytheistic world and the top-down control of this
state atheism,
which, it's I mean, it does happen both ways, but in a book that's as Marxist as this one, it's kind of interesting. I have lived in an
authoritarian atheist state, and there are things about so.
Yeah, no, and I mean it does kind of turn out in similar ways, and I guess that, because this isn't actually rooted in any real sort of historical or real world setting, which does impoverish it a bit, but there are plus and minuses, and one of them is, sure, why not? This could be atheists. This can be an atheist authoritarian regime rather than a monotheistic authoritarian regime, and have the same moral hang-ups and sumptuary laws and all that.
And look, you can also have polytheistic authoritarian regimes.
Of course, I'm not.
Authoritarianism and religion, can intersect, but are not.
Hi, Narendra Modi. Hi. But anyway.
Right, and
Yeah.
So
then we have the lower class people are inherently special because of their blood. Which we've discussed many times before.
Which is a massive pet peeve of mine and continues to be.
When the gods are actually real at the end of this, it kind of fucks it up, the political allegory. So that's incoherent.
And also, I would just like to return to my point of, it's always a little dodgy when you've got a story involving people who murder God and drink God's blood.
Yes, exactly. I mean, no matter how, incredibly
particularly when that then becomes your oppressed underclass.
Yes.
Who has like sumptuary laws.
Yes.
I'm just saying.
Yes. It's the blood libel. We're talking about the blood libel. No, it's not well enough thought out is my problem. Like,
no, it's not well enough thought out for me to like figure out if this is anti-Semitic or philo-Semitic or just utterly clueless.
No, I mean, that utterly clueless is where I would come down, because it's like, part of the reason that I think that is that even given all the stuff that we've talked about before with Nareem, you'll have blind spots if you've been brought up in this situation, and if you've been gaslit and you don't know what to trust, you'll have blind spots. But she is such a combination of smart and dumb, like dumb. It stretched my credulity, put it that way. And the things that she thinks are like massive revelations sort of makes me think that the politics in this book felt received rather than lived, put it that way.
I don't know though. I mean, part of why I'm a pretty firm believer in the author is dead is that sometimes, there's that people can be just as bad about like translating their lived experience into narrative.
It was just the fucking I don't know why I swore there. It was just the difference in like reality and relatability between the relationship part and the political part. Like how specifically observed and well-crafted and nuanced the description of the relationships were versus how utterly cartoonish and over the top the class distinction stuff was.
Right, and especially because the class distinction stuff, it could be a lot more horrifying than it is in a weird way. And I mean, right. On the other hand, that is kind of an interesting choice because this is very much a fantasy dystopia. And I'm willing to grant that it might be a deliberate choice to make your horrifying fantasy dystopia nonetheless not nearly as horrifying as, this woman's relationship with her mother.
Yeah, I mean, it's what's in your it is undeniable that what is like in front of your face in your life every day is going to affect you more.
If that is the book's narrative agenda, and I don't actually think it is, I don't think that the book quite successfully sells it because I think that we are supposed to believe that this is horrifying. That like what's going on is horrifying, but the narrative is just not able to. You're right that the dystopia lacks the sort of visceral horror that some of the relationship stuff does have. And so...
Yeah, part of that is that once you get into the High Kith Quarter, I don't think the author knows entirely what's going on in there. It all feels sort of like disjointed bits and pieces of, here's, the Sun King and Louis XIV, but also here's the very strict and not participating in the revelry at all council. And, she's like, why can't we experience this beauty? But it doesn't sound beautiful. It sounds garish and awful for the most part.
Right.
And,
it really does. But that I was willing, again, that actually I felt was fairly realistic that, Nareem, who's never seen any spectacle really in her life, goes, oh, this is amazing and beautiful and glorious. And, a reader in like with our modern aesthetic sense, goes, wow, that sounds like the tackiest thing ever.
Right. I mean, but it's also, like there's one point where like a character sort of wisely says, oh, the rich people dress up as poor people so that they will feel more rich, which I don't actually think is why that happens at all.
Right. That's a good point. That when the rich people are dressing up as poor people, it's because it's novelty.
Right.
It's like the value of novelty or
in search of authenticity or
or in search of authenticity. Yeah.
Yeah. Like which the sort of the class relation things felt undercooked. And in fact, it's sort of
they definitely felt undercooked. I just don't want to speculate on the author's background and lived experience because
author dead, not important.
But you're really right about that contrast.
Mm-hmm. There's the undercookedness. Actually, the book sort of feels undercooked all the way through to me, in a certain way. Part of that is just the pacing, which is wackadoodle. The book goes and then stops abruptly.
Yep.
And
which
was hilarious, I will admit.
I actually enjoyed the abrupt stop. I just the plot needed to be clipping along from the beginning, and then you can slam us into a wall. That's fine.
Right.
But
you want there to be something after the drop if you're going to give us a long build like that,
Right. Or if you want the experience to be, running face first into a wall, then we should be doing a lot more running instead of spending the first block just ambling along.
Yes, I'm reminded of a silly indie wrestling bit where a person is Irish whipped. They're outside. A person is thrown, how wrestling physics work. A person is sort of thrown across a road, and then they stop to let a car go by, and then they start running again, and then smack into a wall and fall over. It's obviously it's played for laughs, but that's what this book reminded me of.
I'm picturing that. Yeah, I've never seen this, but I can picture it in my head, and that really does seem like a good depiction of the book.
Yeah. So, also the book is anti-bird. It just is. Birds get short shrift in this book.
You're right. The Elysian birds are collaborators.
Yep. And I'm not here for that. I'm not here for this
that's fair.
Bird libel. I didn't do that on purpose. I'm so sorry. So clearly it wasn't going to be for me, but I realize that that's a personal thing. There was another anti-bird thing, but I forgot to write it down. It was the Elysian bird and something else, but I've forgotten what it was. Okay. Did you have any other complaints beyond, what is either anti-Semitism or carelessness?
The thing is, I'm also open to the possibility that this is supposed to be a deliberate allegory, and it's just sufficiently incoherent that's not working.
Right.
The
other thing that really didn't ring true to me is that, Noreen says that, we don't, it's it was only after going to the high quarter that Noreen was like, I've been wearing ugly clothes. And it's the people under the sumptuary laws just don't care how they look, which is absolutely bullshit. Anybody who's ever had to wear a uniform will tell you get hyper focused on those bits and pieces that you can wear, which, go up to the edge of the sumptuary laws. You accessorize. It's
right. But I think that this is a Nareem thing, not a everyone in this world thing, because because you have other people talking about just up, going just up to the border of the sumptuary laws. You see people doing that, and Raven, for example, does that. She's the middle caste, but she definitely walks right up to what the sumptuary laws allow. No, I think it's just again, Nareem has never been allowed to want something. She doesn't know what she looks like even.
And she sort of projects this onto her entire culture.
Right. She has this eidetic memory, and, she can perfectly forge passports, and yet she messes up her own passport because she's always been told that ever looking at her own reflection would be unforgivable vanity.
Right.
So I think that that's actually a fairly well done character bit as opposed to a failed world building bit. Though admittedly, sometimes in this book it's hard to tell which is which.
Sure. I'll grant that. It was just another one of, there was a couple of things which read to me like we were supposed to be this is an interesting observation about the world, which were just patently incorrect. But that again, maybe just because those characters were wrong.
Yeah, I think that the world works. I think that the book works better, works much better, because it's. I thought I liked it better on my reread, partly because I went into it expecting that really understanding that this is told in first person and everything we're getting is so strongly through Nareem's viewpoint. That you really have to treat this book like it has an unreliable narrator.
Fair enough. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, am I giving this book a lot of credit? Or
yeah, it's true. This is how to make the book work from my perspective. Sure. Is it's got an unreliable narrator, and as a piece with an unreliable, I also have a soft spot for unreliable narrator stories. And so, for that, it works. Whether or not the author was trying this on purpose, I have no idea.
Sure. Author's dead. Doesn't matter. You found
exactly.
a reading which makes the book more enjoyable and therefore made the world slightly better.
Yes. and allowed me to reread it so that we could talk about it for the podcast.
There you go. You've done a mitzvah.
But I did enjoy, speaking of character moments, I do enjoy, even though it wasn't subtle, the time, the dream she has where she talks to her younger self, and her younger self is like, do I grow up to be happy? And she's like, well, you don't have to be. And just even her younger self is like, that's bullshit. Yeah.
I also, from a romance novel perspective, again, this has some romance novel bits and pieces in it, but
it definitely
do enjoy the breathless undoing of 200 little buttons, which happens repeatedly. And
yeah, no, again, the relationship stuff, really, whether romantic, not romantic, even though one half thinks that it is, or quasi-parental, that stuff in general works pretty well.
True. Okay. Have we successfully flogged this book?
I think we have successfully dissected this book to whatever extent we can.
Indeed. Next week we are going to be doing a book that is kind of barely a book. It's a novella by Max Gladstone, author of Empress of Forever, and Amal Al-Mohtar, who I love, despite the fact that I have a real hard time pronouncing her name.
I think it's just Amal.
I know, but she was doing it in a particular way, and I was trying to.
That's because she has a Canadian accent.
Canadian?
She's Canadian.
I know she's Canadian, but it's like Amal is not Canadian. That's not where. That's anyway.
Amal is not Canadian. The way that she was, Amal, the person, is Canadian. The name is not necessarily Canadian, but I do feel like that's part of the issue with pronouncing her name, is that it's actually kind of hard to mimic a Canadian accent.
Anyway.
Second podcast in a row. We've
reading a book called "This Is How You Lose the Time War" next,
which is an excellent novella. Yes, and this features 2 returning Lesbians versus Wizards authors.
Indeed, and should be a fun time, and a little amuse-bouche before the enormous main course of the Priory of the Orange Tree, which is what we're doing after that.
Yes.
So I think that's 4 hours of audiobook versus 24 hours of audiobook. So
I guess I read pretty fast, but I should probably start rereading Priory of the Orange Tree now.
Yeah, I think that would be wise. But until then, you can reach us at all of the normal spots. Wiz versus WLW on Twitter, Wizards versus Lesbians on Tumblr, Wizards versus Lesbians on Gmail. And thank you for listening.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, coerced adoption is the subject. Well, coerced adoption is the matter.